Bit about the Sonoma Land Trust. We are a local nonprofit that protects land in Sonoma County for everyone's benefit. And we've been doing this work since 1976 and have protected over 60,000 acres in the county so far. And we accomplish our work through the generosity of our members and contributors. So thanks to all of you out there who are helping us to protect beautiful Sonoma County for future generations. As we pursue our mission of conserving land in Sonoma County, we recognize that we stand upon the unceded ancestral lands of many indigenous peoples. We honor their knowledge, care, and stewardship of this special place across the ages and acknowledge the deep and lasting damage that colonization has inflicted on them. We embrace our responsibility to learn from and protect their cultural and traditional connections to the land. Okay. I'm going to introduce our guest tonight. Toz Soto is a fisheries biologist who has worked for the Karuk Tribe for 25 years and has lived on Karuk land in the Klamath Mountains all his life. Toz graduated from Humboldt State University's fisheries program and has spent many years working on the Klamath Dam removal and studies that support the recovery of Klamath River fish. While he's not stuck in his office writing grants and reports, he enjoys putting on a wetsuit and snorkeling the rivers and creeks, counting summer steelhead and spring run Chinook salmon. And I understand that grant writing piece. Toz, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, and you just give me a nod when you want me to change your screens, advance the slides.
Thank you, Julian. Can everyone hear me okay? Thanks. So yeah, my name is Toz Soto. I've been a fish biologist with the Karuk Tribe for many years, and I guess I was one of the lucky ones to be around 20 years ago and part of some of the first dam removal work on the Klamath. So the name of my talk is Bringing the Salmon Home. And I just want to say that the woman in the picture, Florence Conrad, was a dear friend of mine, and I honor her help to bring the salmon home and get these dams out. So next slide. So the Karuk territory is it's pretty large territory. It's about over 1 million acres. It's in the California side of the Klamath Basin. The Klamath Basin, as you all probably know, encompasses Northern California, a good part of Northern California, and Southern Oregon, and the Klamath River originates out of Klamath Lake. So it's a very diverse river system. It has really high coastal mountains in the inland area, and then the upper basin comes out of Klamath Lake, and it's a large network of wetlands, and a lot of agriculture happens up there as well. And then the dams are located on the California-Oregon border. Go ahead, next slide. So the Karuk have lived in the Klamath, of course, since time immemorial. And one thing that's unique about the Karuk is they continue to practice their traditional fishing and cultural practices. And the photo over on the right side is a photo of Ron Reed, who's a good friend of mine, dip netting at Ishipishi Falls. So it's the traditional dip net fishery has continued since time immemorial. So I think important part of Karuk, or if I was to describe Karuk people, I would describe Karuk people as fish people. Ron Reed told me one time, if we don't eat the salmon and the eels, they won't come back, and that's really true. They also value lamprey and other salmon. I think that the Karuk have a long tradition in fishing, and in the dip net fishery at Ishipishi is really the last fishery they have left. They would fish for spring chinook in the spring with trigger nets and different methods. So at this point, the tribe really has one fishery left. It's for fall chinook at Ishipishi Falls, and so with dam removal, we're hoping to get spring chinook back in the Klamath Basin and restore some of these lost fisheries. So the Klamath fisheries are diverse. It's diverse fishery, diverse culture, and the fisheries support human health, and I think that's an important thing to note. The Karuk fish for Pacific lamprey, spring chinook, coho, steelhead, fall chinook, and even green sturgeon. So, as many people know, the Klamath River has been asked to do way too much. It has very diverse problems. It started with gold mining and the era of genocide in the 1850s. And then in the early 2000s, we had one of the largest fish kills on record, where 60,000 salmon died in the lower Klamath. We had a large fish kill recently after the McKinney fire. Poor water quality is an issue in the Klamath. And then, of course, dams. So we all know fisheries have declined. Fall chinook are about 10% of their historic abundance. Short nose sucker, lost nose suckers that are endemic to the Upper Klamath Lake are federally listed. Coho salmon are federally listed. Spring run chinook are nearly extinct and listed under the California ESA. And other species like Pacific lamprey and green sturgeon are thought to be in decline. So, along with the loss of fisheries becomes a loss of ceremonies, an inability to pass down traditions, and denied access of traditional foods and medicines. And I was part of a report that Kari Norgard wrote, Health of the Karuk People, back in 2005, and this really looked at the effects of the altered diet, where the historically a single Karuk person would eat 400 pounds of fish on an annual basis, and contemporary they're eating 4.5 pounds, I think is what the study showed. But there's 4,000 members in the Karuk Tribe, and the dip net fishery on a good year, we can see maybe 2,000 fish harvested. On a bad year, it's just a few hundred. So it's not enough fish to really feed the population, so there's definitely a need to have more fish in different fisheries. So this is just a photo of the war dance, the T-bar war dance, and this is I just put this photo up here because I live near T-bar, and since I don't dance, they make me cook fish. So I have the photo of fish there. So I've been cooking fish at the T-bar war dance for about 15 years now, and gotten pretty good at it. So I like to show this photo. So Karuk the Karuk religion is centered around Pikyawish, and Pikyawish is the world renewal ceremonies that occur here in the late summer. And part of that is the Karuk practice what we call Pikyav, and Pikyav in Karuk means fix it. It's really simple. So this kind of flow chart here really just kind of shows how we practice Pikyav here at the Karuk Department of Natural Resources, and we try to use traditional ecological knowledge and Western science. And I've put dams in here as kind of the problem. And we and part of that is a lot of collaboration, partnerships, taking advantage of opportunities. And I think dam removal was definitely all that. It was a huge collaboration, many partnerships, and lots of opportunities were taken. And so you see this. The main point here is the Karuk. It's part of the Karuk culture to fix it, and the dam removal was really fixing it. So the focus on dam removal. So that's the map of the Klamath Basin, and you look at the highlighted area there, and you have Iron Gate Dam. These are the dams that were removed. Copco 1 Dam, Copco 2 Dam, and then J.C. Boyle. And the J.C. Boyle Dam is actually up in Oregon, and then the Copco dams were in California, and Iron Gate was the lowest dam in California. So Copco 1 was the first dam to be built. It was built in, I believe, 1918, and then J.C. Boyle went in, and Copco 2. Copco 2 is just a small diversion dam, so it's not a really large structure. It diverted water around what we call Ward's Canyon, which is a really steep reach of the river, and then it ran it through a wooden pipe through a mountain down into a powerhouse. So it really just dewatered about a mile of river. J.C. Boyle Dam is the same thing. It's a diversion dam that diverted water through a tunnel and a ditch for about 4 miles. So it dewatered about 4 miles of the river, and before it went into a powerhouse. And then Iron Gate Dam was built really as a regulation dam for the hydro peaking that was occurring at the upstream dams. And that dam went in the mid 60s. So it was the last dam to go in, and by far the largest dam as far as the size of the dam. The reservoir behind Copco Dam was actually the largest reservoir. Copco is a cement dam. Iron Gate's an earthen dam. J.C. Boyle's was an earthen dam, and Copco was a small cement diversion dam. So why the dams needed to be removed? Well, that's a good question. The dams created reservoirs that slowed the water, heated it, and really made the perfect conditions for algae blooms. And above this hydroelectric project, Klamath Lake is basically a eutrophic lake, so it's really high in phosphorus. So that nutrient-rich water was ponding up in these reservoirs and just having terrible toxic algae blooms. The river would basically turn a kind of a neon green color. The dams block roughly 400 miles of habitat. A lot of that's above Klamath Lake in the Sprague River and Wood River. It really just impaired water quality and contributed to a lot of fish kills that we've seen over the years on the lower Klamath. So one of the things that I think is really important about the dam removal, and it's not necessarily the 400 miles of spawning habitat or the water quality impairments that the dams were causing. It's really giving salmon access to cold water. And I think this is super important in terms of resiliency to climate change. Our rivers are warming up. We're having hotter summers, and these habitats in the upper Klamath, the Williamson River, the Wood River, these are spring-fed rivers. They come right out of the ground. So they're super cold. A lot of the tributaries above the dams come right out of the basalt. They're spring-fed tributaries, so they're really cold. They're stable. They're colder in the summer and warmer in the winter, actually. So you have, an increase in habitat diversity and really thermal diversity. So these salmon are going to have access to these spring systems where they had never had access before. And very few systems in the West have access. The whole Sacramento system is behind dams like the Pitt River and the McCloud River, these spring-fed rivers. They're all above dams, and salmon don't have access to those systems anymore. And now here on the Klamath, we've provided access to these cold water habitats. And I think that's just critically important. So what the dams did, well, like I said before, they blocked over 400 miles of spawning habitat. They degraded water quality. They hosted algae blooms, created habitat for fish disease. They limited run diversity. We've lost our spring Chinook salmon. So the dams were not doing a whole lot. And so what did the dams did not do? The dams did not make a lot of money for PacifiCorp. It actually would have lost money under the new license. The dams did not make a lot of power. The dams did not provide irrigation or drinking water diversions. And lastly, the dams did not provide flood control. So these were strictly hydroelectric dams, and they were really old infrastructure. But I think economically, they weren't making a lot of money for the company. And I think that, when it costs more to put fish ladders in and improve water quality and things like that, the company decided that, economically, it wasn't worth it to continue to pursue the license. So I got to say, a large part of the story is just about persistence, and it's persistence of some, key tribal people. I down in the photo there, from left to right is Ron Reed and Poppy Ferris and Jeff Mitchell. He's a tribal leader in the Upper Klamath, and then Leif Hillman, who's my old boss. He's currently a ceremonial leader with the Karuk Tribe, and these people, along with a lot of other tribal people, were just incredibly persistent. They did not give up through the whole process. And I think something to remember about the Karuk Tribe and tribes in general is things like restoring salmon or putting fire back on the landscape, things like that. Those are generational issues. So I know that Ron and Leaf's kids will take up the fight on these issues, and so it is a generational fight, and I think that the dam removal, I think, gave a lot of tribal people hope that we can make change, and so but it really just boiled down to people showing up and being persistent. So getting PacifiCorp to the table. So that was one of our goals back in the early 2000s, was to motivate the company to negotiate, and so the tribes back in 2003, I believe, sent a group of folks to Scotland, actually to the shareholders meeting when Scottish Power owned PacifiCorp, and they did that for 2 years in a row. And then when Scottish Power said, okay, finally, they just sold it to Berkshire Hathaway. So they went to Omaha to the shareholders meeting, to Warren Buffett's shareholders meeting, and so it was those kind of actions, along with lots of protests at the Capitol in Oregon and the Capitol in Sacramento. And really, I would also say that when we first started talking about dam removal, we knew that we had to have a good media campaign. And I gotta, give credit to people like Craig Tucker and others who really helped us, kind of not only be in the media, but really kind of get ahead of the media and really get the story out there. So grassroots pressure was really half the story. The other half of the story, and this is not in the media, but it's in the FERC record. FERC is the Federal Energy Regulation. Prevent when Pacific Core was going for their new license, it was really the tribal scientists and the NGO scientists and even the agency scientists, basically contributing to the studies and the Pacific Core was, we'd see models that would show that the habitat is really poor above the dams, or they won't make it above Klamath Lake or whatever, and so we really had to fight against their efforts to kind of water down the value of the habitat and the importance of removing the dams. So the tribe and the tribes, I'd say all Klamath tribes, Karuk, Yurok, Hupa, Klamath tribes. It was an interesting alliance with a lot of environmental groups that normally the tribes or previously hadn't collaborated with. So it was an exercise in collaboration, and new friendships were made. It was really kind of as Craig Tucker liked to say, it was suit science and scientists. So, and I think anyone that's worked in fisheries understands that fisheries is very political. It's about 90% politics. It's fish and water are things that the public really cares about and are very passionate about. And we had some leaders, Troy Fletcher and Ronnie Pierce, who are no longer with us, but they played a huge role in the dam removal. Troy was kind of the master strategist, and Ronnie was kind of the fierce fighter. But Ronnie had the vision. Ronnie Pierce, she convinced us that dam removal is possible. And I love this quote by Ronnie at the bottom. It says, I read their goddamn application, and you couldn't tell if the salmon even lived in the Klamath River. And she's referring to the document that she's standing by, which is the application for the license. So that was it. The dams, finally in 2024, well, actually 23, the first dams started coming out. And the decision through the Klamath, through the settlements, and it basically boiled down to the KRC was formed, which is the Klamath Renewal Corporation. Their mission was to remove the dams. The funding came from Oregon and California, and then Pacific Core. So and it costs a little over 400 million. So the final decision was made in the I think it was actually late 2022, and then we knew the dams were coming out, so there was a lot of work to do to kind of prepare for the dam removal. So one of the big tasks was to protect fish that were going to be impacted by the dam removal. So my team, along with Resource Environmental Solutions, and some other consultants, did a bunch of pre-reservoir drawdown work. And one of those projects was removing these endangered suckers from the reservoirs. So that effort happened in the summer prior to the drawdown. So that would have been in 2023. And this is just a photo of a couple of the reservoirs. It was actually a lot of work. It was done at night. So another effort, knowing that the fish in the downstream reaches of the dam removal would be impacted by the sediments and potential poor water quality caused by the drawdown. And so part of the permitting said that we had to protect fish. So we did a bunch of co-juvenile removal. This is another effort that our fisheries crew worked on with RES. So yeah, this was basically in the weeks leading up to the drawdown. So this occurred in December of 2023, and the drawdown started in January of 2024. So the idea was to relocate as many endangered fish as we could. So we actually spent, I would say a year or so planning this and 2 weeks implementing it. But we ended up relocating a little over 200 coho. One of the interesting things was we would pit tag these coho, and pit tag is basically you can identify the fish with the pit tags. And we trucked a fish 4 miles upstream, released it into an off-channel pond, and literally a week later we caught the fish 4 miles downstream in the same exact spot that we'd relocated it from in the river. So that kind of gave me some confidence that these fish can deliberately move around. They know where they're going, and hopefully avoid some of the poor water quality impacts that we were going to see below the dam removal. So we ended up relocating a little over 200 fish. This is just a photo of one of the off-channel ponds that we were putting these fish into. And like I said before, obviously the coho had other things in mind, but I'm hopeful that some of these fish survived. So the dam removal started in 2023 with the removal of Copco 2, and that's that small diversion dam that's right below Copco 1. And the photo on the bottom is just after. So the drawdown timeline, and this is just a slide that I stole from the KRC, but it shows the timeline. So you see in November of 2023, November, December, that's when we were basically lowering the reservoirs. The reservoirs were lowered to kind of their lowest operating level, and then in January there were basically tunnels blown in or opened up in the bottom of the reservoirs, and then they just put dynamite charges in there and open the reservoirs in January. So that's what I call drawdown, is when the reservoirs are draining. Actually, we planned on the drawdown to happen over the course of a month, but it really happened like literally within a week. These reservoirs were drained, so it happened a lot faster um, than I think anyone anticipated. And once you blow a hole in the bottom of the dam, you really don't have any control at that point. So um, the so Copco 1 actually, I think it took less than a week to drain. That was the largest one. So I'll go back to that slide. Sorry. So the reason that the drawdown was planned for January, February, winter months was just kind of minimize impacts on fish in water quality. So so it was 2024 was actually a pretty wet year. So we had issues with the river. The flows would go up and exceed the amount of water that could drain out of the tunnel. So the reservoirs were starting to refill at points. And we were really worried during this time that it would delay the actual dam decommissioning or the dam demolition period. So it was critical that we start the project was started on time and finished on time. We didn't want to be in a situation where the dams were still being removed and the final cofferdams were pulled out, and salmon would be coming up the river and running into that. And so they were really pushing up against a timeline. And the reservoirs refilling was definitely one of the challenges. So this is just a photo of one of the tunnel. This is the tunnel they drilled at the bottom of Copco. And this is just a photo of the blast. So they blasted Copco and drained Copco Reservoir. So here's a photo of Copco Reservoir, and it's actually a really good photo of Copco Reservoir. It's not that neon green color that it usually is. It's actually blue in this color in this photo. And then this is the photo of Copco Valley, literally days after the reservoir drained. So the reservoir sediments were really wet right after the dam removal, and a lot of the sediment. I mean, this stuff, I would describe the sediments in the reservoir as kind of a decaying, like layers of dead algae and clay. So it really wasn't the traditional sediment that you think of. This stuff, I saw a presentation where one of the geologists put filled a cooler full of this stuff and then let it dry out, and it actually lost about 20, maybe 50% of its volume. It just shrunk right up, and then you add water and it's like a sponge. It's basically so this stuff was really mobile. When it got wet, it really just kind of turned into pudding. So and I said before, Copco and the reservoirs drained really fast. So and it was intentional. We wanted the reservoirs to drain in a way where sediment would flush out as quickly as possible. So this kind of mucky, sludgy sediment, when it was still wet, it was really mobile. So it was just flowing into the river immediately after the drawdown. So after the drawdown, the river just found its channel. I mean, it was pretty incredible to see the river. I got to say, the first time I drove up there after the drawdown and seeing the river in its historic channel right away was kind of surprising. We'd gone up to the Elwha River and looked at some of these other dam removals, and a lot of the problems they faced up there was the reservoirs were just full of rocks and gravel and sand. Um, this was unique. The reservoirs are also, they're located below Klamath Lake, so there's not a lot of like sediment transport into these reservoirs. So it was mostly, like I said before, dead algae and clays. So this is a photo of Kopko Reservoir right after the drawdown, and one thing that struck me was when the river found its old channel, started to uncover, trees that had been underwater for more than 100 years. Um, you know, there was a lot of old cars and things. I mean, there's a lot of different things that were kind of uncovered by the drawdown. But I was really struck by these oak trees that were growing, before they turned this place into a lake, and they're still standing. And now there's herons and eagles using these trees that had been under the reservoir. They're still standing. It was really interesting to see. I mean, I floated the reach a few different times, and it's amazing to see the there's a lot of history. There was some old wagons that were uncovered near some of the old homestead sites. So there was no road into Kopko Valley before the reservoir was built. So it was really just wagon trails. This is a photo of Jenny Creek. This is one of the tributaries into the Iron Gate Reservoir footprint. And what you'll notice there is a lot of deposition, and this is kind of right where the creek goes went into the reservoir, and it had this delta that had formed of sediment. So the restoration crews did a lot of bulldozing and just actively just pushing sediment into Jenny Creek to get it to flush out and clean out those delta areas where the tributaries met the reservoir. All the sediments would just fall out in that zone, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. So what about the sediment? There was everybody wanted to know about the sediment. I mean, our local community here on the Klamath, a lot of people were really concerned about the sediment, and, for good reason. I mean, this was, a transformational thing, and there was, while there, as far as dam removals go, not a lot of sediment for the size of these reservoirs, but there was still 17 to 20 million cubic yards behind the dams, and like I said before, it's that really fine muck. The thing about this type of sediment, though, is once it gets in the water column, it really moves. So the idea was to flush it all the way out to the ocean. So the high sediment concentrations we did see were expected as a short-term impact, but we knew there'd be long-term benefit. So it's really just one of the prices of dam removal. And then finally, the sediment was non-toxic. It did not have heavy metals or mercury, some of those really nasty things you have where there was no mining or gold mining above these reservoirs. It's really the volcanic region, so there's no gold up there. And I say, despite what Siskiyou County Board of Supervisors and the anti-dam removal advocates said, I mean, there was a lot of misinformation that was being spread during the dam removal, and a lot of the discussion was about the sediment and how we were killing all the fish and we ruined the river. There was actually one of the local stores on the river was selling T-shirts that said "River of Death" and had a showed a bunch of dead fish in the Klamath River. So I mean, it was definitely a talking point for some of the, I would say, I don't know how to describe them, but I'll just leave it at that. So yeah, there was extremely high sediment concentrations after the dam removal. This is just a photo of the river the day after the drawdown began and the sediment started coming down. And I took this photo below the Interstate 5 bridge, and the river had, it was like a chocolate milk, but it had this different sound. You normally hear kind of this whitewater sound and the rush of the river, and it was more of a gurgling sound. So it was really high concentrations of sediment. It's just another photo. You just see kind of the white foam, and you don't really see, white water in that riffle. That's a really high concentration of sediment there. So monitoring sediment, the Karuk Tribe has a whole network of monitoring sites, and we actually put in a few new ones in preparation for the dam removal. And if you go to Karuk Water Quality, Karuk.us, you'll find a real-time map, and if you click on those dots, you'll get different water quality parameters, water temperature, dissolved oxygen, and sediment concentrations or turbidity. So if anyone is interested in looking at the water quality data, it's available online through the Karuk Tribe's website. So going back to the timeline here, I put turbidities, the red line on this chart, and discharge stream flow is the blue line, and then the green line is dissolved oxygen. And you see where I have that red arrow, the drawdown occurred like on about the third week of January, and we saw an immediate spike in turbidity, and then a dissolved oxygen sag. So dissolved oxygen actually dropped to zero, and at that point, the probes are just fouled. So we're just assuming that the dissolved oxygen dropped to zero. I mean, you can't operate a dissolved oxygen meter when you have that high of turbidity. I'll show a few more, and I have that. You can see the equipment was buried, so that's a. So it was a real challenge operating these data sondes when we had this event occurring. So we had crews up there checking them constantly and daily, or sometimes a couple times a day, because we really wanted to know what was going on. We kind of were preparing for the worst and hoping for the best here. So that dissolved oxygen drop did cause a fish die off. We did find dead fish in the river, not a lot, but conditions were obviously very turbid, and it was very difficult to actually see anything. But we did find a few steelhead washed up. but most of the fish that we found dead were invasive fish, actually, from the reservoirs, like yellow perch and brown bullhead, um, and fish like that. So, and even today, our crews are out there sampling now, and they're finding a lot less invasive fish. The reservoirs were really kind of the place where that harbored fish, harbored the exotic fish. So the turbidity improved with time. So this is the line really starts where drawdown was initiated, and then it goes to, that's about the end of the beginning of April. So in that couple month time frame, the turbidity really improved. We actually convinced the Bureau of Reclamation to do some releases out of Klamath Lake to flush sediment. So you see those lumps there, those are flow increases, and then you see the flow increase followed by the spike in turbidity. And so we were able to convince the Bureau to do a few of those. That really helped. And I think having, this was all in 2024, but this past year, in 25, we've had an amazing water year. I know you all down on the Russian have also had an amazing water year. And it's been a great year for just flushing sediment out of the system for us. So this is kind of the way I measure turbidity. This is my hand. This is right after drawdown in February, full of sediment. And then, like I said, a couple months later, the water was not quite back to normal, but close to. So during the drawdown and post drawdown period, we did a lot of sampling, and as these, the drawdown started in January, a lot of salmon spawn in the main stem, so they were at risk. But then there's a lot of the population spawns in the Shasta, the Scott, a lot of the tributaries. So we knew there'd be a bunch of outmigrants coming out of these tributaries, and we were worried about their condition. So we would, seine on a weekly basis just to look at fish and see how they were doing and take photos. And see, here's some photos of a few smolt that we captured after the drawdown. So I think the initial dissolved oxygen crash was pretty bad, but it dissolved oxygen actually recovered pretty quickly. And as everyone knows, salmon have evolved with a lot of sediment, and most of our streams are pretty turbid in the wintertime. So, after the drawdown, there was, and knowing that the sediments on the reservoir footprints were still wet, it was a good time to put down seed. One of the things we learned on the Elwha dam removal was get the seed out as before everything dries out, because then it'll sprout. So they used a lot of different plant species, and I don't know the exact number of seeds that went out, but most of it was spread by hand by the Karuk Tribe. They had a restoration crew working on the reservoir restoration, and then they actually used helicopters to do quite a bit of the seeding, because it wasn't safe for humans to be walking around on the wet sediments in some areas. So a helicopter was used to spread the seed, and the plants came back pretty good. So I'm just going to go through a few photos of the first year after dam removal. I took these photos like a week ago, so they're pretty fresh. You see the banks of the river. This is in the Iron Gate footprint at the mouth of Jenny Creek, and it's just thick grass, really rich. Everything's really big. I don't know if you guys have ever seen, you know what mullein is, but mulleins kind of one of my favorite flowers, and the mullein are like 3 or 4 feet across, and they're probably going to be like 12 feet tall. It's really productive. These soils are really rich. There's a lot of phosphorus in this soil. This is a picture of Camp Creek. It's another tributary to Iron Gate Reservoir footprint, and you see where the tributary after this year's high flow is cut down to its native bed, and there's spawning gravels exposed and riffles, and so it's really cool to see this evolution happen in such a quick time frame. And this is Jenny Creek. This is the largest tributary to Iron Gate Reservoir, and you really see the fresh down cutting, and a lot of the sediments in Jenny have washed down the river after this past winter. And this is Beaver Creek. This is a really small tributary in Copco Valley, and it still has quite a bit of sediments, but you can see the vegetation. Like that was an old willow tree that was next to Beaver Creek back in the 100 years ago. It's still there. And one of the really interesting things that I observed in Copco Valley was we actually found willows that were stump sprouting. So these willows had been underwater since 1918, and they were stump sprouting. There's a wetland in the background of this photo, and none of those plants were planted there. And I was talking to one of the restoration folks that's working up there, and they said, yeah, there's all these plants that are coming up that aquatic plants that were had been under the reservoir for 100 years, and they're sprouting up. And I'd never thought that willow would stump sprout after 100 years underwater. So getting to the final phase, or the most recent phase of the post dam removal monitoring. So everybody wants to know, okay, what happened? How'd the fish do? What was the water quality like? And we knew that there'd be a lot of questions. So we already had the water quality system in place. We added sonar, radio tagging. We were doing spawning surveys all over the Klamath Basin, so we just expanded that effort into the dam removal reach. And then there was video counting weirs that the state of California ran on some of these tributaries. So we just want to let the fish tell us where they're going. So one of the interesting things with water quality, and this is just another chart that our water quality staff put together for me. But when you look at that red circle, the solid line is temperature from last year, and the drawdown. So this was the first time that the river had essentially been free from no reservoirs. The reservoirs were really heat sinks, and they caused kind of this late season high temperature. And the reason that was bad is because it was during the salmon migration. And, so when the salmon come into the Klamath River, they're really cued by water temperature. And I think the Klamath is unique because it's a spring-fed river. It's not like your coastal streams where they really need rain to bring the salmon in. But the Klamath is really, when the temperature drops, the salmon come in. It has the flow because it's a spring-fed river. So it's really temperature that was keeping the fish out. And what we saw was about a 4.5 degree C lower river temperature after the reservoirs were drawn down, and that's where you see that red circle. That's showing that that dark line is what the temperatures were last year, and the dash line is what the 9-year average has been. So it's significantly less. So that has that's a big benefit for salmon that are migrating into the Klamath River in the fall and late summer. We also did spawning surveys. We had a lot of collaborators. Like I said before, we just expanded our effort into the dam removal reaches. We couldn't see very well, so the turbidity was really high last fall. So we relied on kind of a mark and recapture of carcasses. We collected, tissue samples on carcasses. We used the tissue samples for genetic work, aging. We took gut samples for fish disease. You can do a lot with when you get these carcasses in hand and learn about the fish's life history. We collected otoliths. We're supplying samples to UC Davis, Cal Poly Humboldt, Oregon State, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Fish Health Lab. So there's a lot of information being collected during the spawning surveys, not just fish numbers. So as far as fish numbers from the video, this includes Fall Creek hatchery returns and the spawning surveys. There wasn't a lot of Chinook, but 1,400 fish did get counted through those methods. And I'll note that most of those fish, 1,164 of those fish, were counted in tributaries. We didn't count a lot of fish in the main stem, and the reason being is because we just couldn't see. The river was really dirty. So we had to use sonar to count fish in the main stem, and I'm glad we did the sonar because this only tells half the story here. So the sonar is basically a sound beam that's shot across the river, and it records like a movie-like image of fish migrating upstream. And you can't really tell what species, but based on the size of the image, you can tell whether it's a Chinook or, say, a rainbow trout. So maybe we can get this to play. So this is just an image of a fish swimming through the sonar. This might actually be the first fish to swim by the sonar. I'm not sure, but maybe play that one more time. So when we were up on the Elwha River a few years ago, they were, and this was after the dam removal on the Elwha, they were using a sonar system to monitor salmon returns to the Elwha. And there's a gentleman up there, Keith Denton, who we, of course, hired to come help us with our sonar. So it's been a really cool tool. Cal Trout, the Karuk Tribe and Karuk Tribe have collaborated on the sonar project. So I have some results here to show. So results, yeah. And this is just really the preliminary results, but we found this in this time frame. This was just data from mid-October to mid-November, and there were over 7,000 fish counted in the sonar, and we believe most of those were false Chinook salmon. I just got word the other day that the final results had come in, and there were over 9,000 Chinook salmon. It swam by the sonar camera that was below the former Iron Gate dam site. So this was the kind of data that we really needed to have to effectively know how many fish came by or swam by the swam through the old dam footprints. I mean, we found fish um, in Jenny Creek literally 10 days after the cofferdams were breached. Less than a month later, um, literally weeks later, there were fish found in Oregon. We have not documented fish above Klamath Lake, but there were salmon spotted in the Keno fish ladder. And Keno Dam is kind of in the down just below Klamath Lake. So we're running sonar right now. I was just in a meeting today, and so sonar is in place, and they're already seeing quite a few lamprey actually go through the sonar, which is really interesting. Um, this data doesn't include Pacific lamprey, but Pacific lamprey are a species that don't hone to their natal stream. They don't have site fidelity. They don't necessarily go back to the stream they were from, and they're attracted to a pheromone that the juvenile lamprey, the larval lamprey, release. So the adults are really attracted to the juveniles, and I think that as far as the sediment being flushed out of the Klamath River is a very attractive thing for Pacific lamprey. So my hypothesis is we're going to have lamprey coming from Mexico all the way to Canada, coming back to the Klamath because they know there's good habitat up there. Larval lamprey live in sediments. They need sediments. So, with the dams blocking sediments, the lamprey population was really suffering. There was just no rearing habitat for juvenile lamprey. So now that all these sediments have been released, fish are able to migrate upstream. It's really a benefit for all species, not just salmon. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about how fish respond, and if we're going to see different life history expressions with especially with Chinook. I'm hopeful that we'll have spring Chinook repopulating the Upper Klamath here soon. So with that, I just want to acknowledge the people and families, and a lot of people have contributed to not only just this talk, but the dam removal was an effort that was done by thousands of people. So I'm just one really small cog in a really big wheel that resulted in the dam removal.
Let's take the liberty of just asking the first one because I'm curious. I mean, I had a whole bunch, but describing that process of drawdown, in those big holes that were dynamited, but they were drilled first. Like, how do you do that? Do you begin drilling a hole on underwater on the upstream side, or do you do it on the down? Like, what's the approach there?
I think there was I mean, I am not the expert in drilling holes in the bottom of dams and dynamiting, but the engineers from Macmillan did an excellent job, and they basically had to drill dynamite. They ran into challenges like in Copco, there were railroad ties that they'd used instead of rebar. So they couldn't really drill through the railroad ties. So they'd have to just kind of blast their way. So I think that tunnel was like 80 feet. And then they got about 10 or 12 feet from the backside of the dam. They stopped there, reinforced the entire thing, got it ready to handle a bunch of water. And then when the time came, they sent a guy in there with a backpack full of dynamite, and he stuffed all the holes. And the funny story is Governor Newsom wanted to push the button, and McMillan said, "Nope." The guy crawled into that tunnel and put that dynamite in there is gonna push the button on that one.
Definitely. Oh my gosh, that must have been
So
yeah, that's a scary job right there.
yeah, I mean, I hats off to the engineers and the contractors that actually pulled this off. I mean, it was an amazing feat.
Do you happen to know, is there a documentary in the making about the
Yeah.
story?
Yep. Shane Anderson with Swiftwater Films is making a documentary. It's going to be released in the summer of 2026. So it's still got about a year out. But we've been working with Shane, and Shane, a lot of those drone shots that I was showing were photos that Shane had taken, and he's been really great in providing his footage as we go.
Great. Question about beaver. Do you anticipate the return of beaver to the landscape as the willow and other riparian vegetation grows up in
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I actually was super encouraged. I floated Copco Valley, that reach in a raft on one of those spawning surveys back in December, and there was already willow shoots that were already popping up, and the river was really just lined with these willows that were maybe 6 to 8 feet tall. And I was noticing beaver chews, like
Mm,
literally every couple willows was chewed and cut already. So the beavers are already in there, already doing their thing. So um, I'm expecting to see beaver dams, especially on that tributary Beaver Creek that goes into Copco. I think they actually found some remnant beaver dams in there. So I mean, it just looks like a place that beaver would start to take over. So it's exciting to
that's
see.
in
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know all the names of those tributaries, but you showed a bunch of slides of them, and you showed how several of them were kind of incised after, after the drawdown and the takedown. Are those the one, like, is that where and of course that means I guess they're not really connected. They become a little disconnected from their
Well,
floodplains.
I didn't really talk about it, but there's going to be a restoration effort that's going to get
Okay.
underway this summer. So they're going to be putting a bunch of large wood in
Oh,
there. There's some of the floodplains are going to be lowered where there's sediment deposition. Um, so things like that are planned to try to help with some of that down cutting and get better floodplain connection. But certainly, if we see beavers in there
yeah,
building dams, I mean, those are the kind of natural processes that I like to see.
that'll get it done quickly. Yeah. So how many years do you think it will take for all that sediment to wash out? Any sense of that?
Well, it really depends on the type of winters we have and the flows. And I think this year, this is probably the wettest year I've seen in probably 10 years. We had not only high flows, but we had really high sustained flows. We saw a peak flow at Iron Gate of over 10,000 CFS, which is really rare. I mean, there's been years where we didn't get peak flows at all when they were managing that reservoir. It just didn't spill, and so the river has become very dynamic. If you look at the hydrograph, you see peaks. So when it rains, the river comes up. When it's not raining, the river drops. So we're seeing a lot of fluctuation in flows, but this year I think, to, I mean, after this year, if it would have been a dry year, I'd have said, well, yeah, maybe 10 years but I think it's just going to be, if we keep getting years like this, it's going to be really fast. A lot
Yeah.
of sediment moved this winter.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, So, yeah, when those reservoirs were drained, it opened up this landscape, and that was interesting to see that old oak standing. And so clearly, it wasn't all just right on the edge like Willow. What happens with that land? Is that going to just be left, and the river's allowed to kind of migrate back and forth across that valley, or do you
Well,
know?
I mean, the river does migrate valley wall to valley wall, which is kind of unique. You don't see, well, I don't know of any valleys that aren't developed. And this is like probably the only one.
Hmm.
Um, but the land itself is going back to the Shasta Indian Nation. So the Shasta tribe is getting the land back, and there's over 2,000 acres in that reservoir footprint. So um, the Shasta tribe is going to take over ownership of that particular valley.
And so there's a lot of fish monitoring going on and water quality monitoring. Are you also doing vegetation monitoring in those areas?
Yeah, the Resource Environmental Solutions, they have a whole team that's working on the reservoir restoration, and they have crews out there flying drones and mapping vegetation, and along with the Yurok tribe. So yeah, there's a big effort to track that. One of the big challenges was they had to fence out the wild horses that are up there to protect
Sure.
the vegetation from the horses.
So I may mispronounce this because I'm not familiar with this place, but there's a question that says, have you documented salmon in Saikan Marsh?
Not yet. I don't know a whole lot about Saikan Marsh, but that's way up there. That's in the headwaters. So if we get spring Chinook back in the upper Klamath and we get these early running fish that can migrate more than 400 miles upriver, then we might get fish up in Saikan Marsh. I don't know
Hmm.
yet.
Yeah, lot to still find out. I can't remember if you said this or mentioned something about it early in the presentation, but there's a question about the lamprey. Are they eaten? Are they a food source?
Lamprey are definitely a food source. They're the first kind of fresh fish that the tribes have access to. They come into Karuk territory usually in April, March, and May. Like right now is kind of peak season for lamprey, and our fisheries crew are documenting quite a few lamprey here in Orleans right now.
So all those dams, when you took them out, all that material, that you talked about the concrete and, I imagine there's lots of metal, everything. Where's all that stuff? Where'd that go?
So the concrete and I believe the concrete and metal from the Copco um, 1 and 2, I believe that was trucked to a disposal site somewhere nearby. I don't know exactly where that went. The Iron Gate dam was actually built with it was an earthen dam, so they removed a big chunk of the earth to build that dam. So they actually took the dam and put it right back to where they got it. So they took all the dirt that they'd taken out of Iron Gate and trucked it right back to the place it came from originally. So that's where
Hmm,
where that material went.
interesting. Um, well, this is a broad question, but are there other examples of dam removals that you know of that resulted in habitat restoration?
Yeah, there's quite a few. The most notable one and the one I'm probably the most familiar with is the Elwha dams up in the Olympic Peninsula in Washington. They removed two dams on the Elwha, but the Elwha is a relatively small river. I mean, it's just 20 or 30 miles from the dams down to the ocean. Um, but one of the coolest things I noticed about the Elwha Dam was I saw pictures of the estuary at the Elwha, and it was basically just the river going into kind of like this steep cobbly bank where in the ocean there. And so I was really struck by that when I actually saw the estuary, the Elwha, after all the sediments had been able to be freed down the Elwha River. There was a 40-acre beach. There was an estuary that was starting to form because of the sediments. There were like it's on the Elwha tribe's reservation. There were kids out building sandcastles and playing in the sand. I heard there was actually surfers out there surfing in the waves that were created because of the sandbar. And I heard they also have a crab fishery now that they didn't before because of the sediments forming an estuary and the inputs from the river. The other thing on the Elwha is they didn't have Chinook salmon come back as fast, but they had steelhead populations, summer steelhead populations come back really quickly. And I don't know exactly what's going on in the Elwha, but I heard their co-populations are doing really well, and they're starting to see some response. But that was more than 10 years ago, and it's going to take some time. But I think the thing to remember about the Klamath dams was that the fish hatchery was right below the dams. We had high concentrations of fish spawning below the dams. There were salmon swimming up to those dams every year and beating their head against the dam, and then they were forced to spawn just downstream. So the salmon knew where home was. They just couldn't get there, and I think that pulling out the dam just allowed the fish to go where they wanted to go. And honestly, the habitat above these dams is some of the best habitat I've ever seen. I mean, the low gradient valley there in Copco Valley is going to be epic fish habitat.
Wow. So we talked about the documentary that's being worked on and gonna come out, I think you said in 2026. There's a question about how else the word is getting out. Like, are there school groups coming out? Field trips? Are there
Oh,
students studying? Yeah, that sounds like a lot.
you don't even want to know how many school field trips I've been on and tours. And one of the coolest things I did recently was I took a group of Mongolians from Mongolia that the Wild Salmon Center had sponsored to come over in an exchange to look at the dam removal here on the Klamath. And they're considering building dams in Mongolia right now. So it was a really cool thing to do, is to host a tour with people from Mongolia.
Interesting. Yeah.
I mean, we've had just with the Karuk, we have an education department, and watershed education is a huge thing here locally. So all the nonprofits and different groups that help with those efforts have led many restoration tours, and they still continue. I mean, it's a pretty much a weekly thing now.
Cool. I have there's a request, and I think maybe we can respond directly to this person. They wanted to see the slide, the early slide with the list of fish and their current names. And maybe I can get that from you, and we could give that to that person later. Last question here. The big thanks from all of the people with questions, all our audience. And a question is, how can I get involved and help out? Is there a way?
I mean, I think the you know the dam removal is one step in salmon restoration. It's a huge step. I mean, it's the biggest step that I think anyone's taken. But there's always going to be a demand for water on the Klamath, and the tribes are always going to have to fight for water. So I think, and like I said before, fish and water are very political. So I think that supporting, you know, legislation, regulation, things that protect rivers, and not just the Klamath. I mean, there's other rivers that either have dams or have water, or over allocated um, for water. So that there's a lot that you can do. Specifically, the Karuk tribe is, we're a tribal government. We're not an NGO. So I mean, I would say donate to your local NGOs that protect water and fish.
Sounds good. Well, Taz, I gotta say that's like, I mean, for you having worked, I forget what the number was, 25 or 26 years up there, that must just be, I mean, that's just very few people in their careers get to do something like that and be in a place that long and see that dramatic a change. So congratulations to you and everyone involved. It's incredible. It's national and it's international news. And thank you for the work you've done there, and thank you for sharing that with us tonight. And Mariana, thank you for your interpretation. And I'll just say thanks to everybody for attending. And that was fantastic. So thank you. And
Thank
yeah,
you.
you bet.